You know what they don't tell you about Florida? It's not the heat that gets you. It's not the humidity. It's not even the gators. It's the fact that everyone who comes here is either running from something or running to something. And sometimes what they're running from follows them. Sometimes what they're running to has been waiting. My name is Trooper Marcus Rodriguez, Florida Highway Patrol, 24 years. I've worked every highway from the Panhandle to the Keys. I've seen spring breakers do things that would make you question humanity. I've pulled bodies from canals that the gators wouldn't touch. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Alligator Alley in the summer of 2018. If you're watching this from Florida, drop your county in the comments, especially if you're from Collier or Broward. You might have heard the rumors. You might have seen the missing person posters. But you don't know the truth about mile marker 51. They say Florida is where America goes to die. They're wrong. It's where America goes to disappear. And if you've ever driven I-75 through the Everglades at night, if you've ever felt like something was watching you from those endless miles of sawgrass and shadow, if you've ever had your radio go to static right around mile marker 51, well, maybe you should keep driving. Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. June in South Florida is like breathing through a wet towel soaked in gasoline. The heat doesn't just surround you, it invades you, fills your lungs with air so thick you can almost chew it. I was working the night shift on Interstate 75, that stretch between Naples and Fort Lauderdale that the locals call Alligator Alley. 78 miles of straight road cutting through the heart of the Everglades, nothing but sawgrass and water and things that hunt in the dark on either side. I'd been a Florida State Trooper for 19 years by June 2018, and I thought I'd seen everything the Sunshine State could throw at me. Miami drug runners using the alley as their personal speedway. Tourists from Ohio who thought they could pet the 14-foot gators sunning on the service roads. Hurricane evacuees trying to drive through Category 4 winds because they didn't want to miss their flight home. Florida had a special brand of crazy, and after almost 2 decades, I'd developed an immunity to it. Or so I thought. The call came in at 2:43 a.m. on June 15th. I was parked at mile marker 45, watching for speeders and fighting to stay awake despite the thermos of Cuban coffee I'd picked up in Miami before my shift. The radio crackled with that particular static you only get in the middle of the Everglades, where cell towers are scarce and the humidity plays hell with electronics. Unit 447, this is dispatch. We've got an abandoned vehicle at mile marker 51, eastbound lane. Florida plates, reported by a trucker about 10 minutes ago. Mile marker 51. Even hearing it over the radio made something in my chest tighten. That particular stretch of road had a reputation among the troopers. More accidents there than anywhere else on the alley. But when you investigated, you could never find a cause. No oil slicks, no debris, no reason for cars to suddenly veer off into the canal. And then there were the abandonment cases. In the 5 years I'd been working this stretch regularly, we'd had 7 vehicles found abandoned at mile marker 51. No sign of the drivers, no sign of struggle, just empty cars with the engines still running, AC still blowing, like the occupants had simply ceased to exist. Unit 447 responding, I said into the radio, en route to mile marker 51, ETA 5 minutes. The drive should have been simple. 6 miles of straight, flat highway with nothing but the occasional semi hauling produce from the farms near Homestead. But as I approached mile marker 50, my cruiser's electronics started acting up. The radio cycled through stations on its own, picking up fragments of music and voices in languages I didn't recognize. The GPS showed my location jumping around, 1 second saying I was still in Naples, the next claiming I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The temperature gauge on the dashboard climbed steadily, even though the engine temperature was normal. Then I saw it, a white Toyota Camry, maybe 3 years old, parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. The driver's door was open, interior lights on, but I couldn't see anyone inside or nearby. I pulled up behind it, angling my cruiser to protect the scene from any traffic, though at this hour the road was nearly empty. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the vehicle, one hand instinctively resting on my service weapon. 24 years of experience had taught me that the calm scenes were often the most dangerous. "Florida Highway Patrol," I called out. "Anyone here?" My voice seemed to die just a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by the thick night air. The only response was the rhythmic chirping of insects and the distant splash of something large moving in the water beyond the guardrail. The Camry was a rental, one of those tourist specials from the airport. The keys were still in the ignition, engine running, AC blasting cold air that felt like heaven after the oppressive heat outside. A purse sat on the passenger seat, untouched. In the back, 2 suitcases and a collection of Disney World souvenirs: mouse ears, a stuffed Pluto, a princess dress that probably belonged to a little girl about 6 years old. A family, whoever had been in this car, was a family. I photographed everything, then ran the plates. The car was rented to Jennifer Walsh from Cleveland, Ohio. According to the rental agreement on the dashboard, she'd picked it up at Miami International Airport 3 days ago. Traveling with her were her husband Michael and their daughter Emma. I walked around the vehicle, shining my light on the ground, looking for footprints, signs of struggle, anything. The shoulder was that crushed shell and gravel mix Florida uses, and it should have shown prints clearly. But there was nothing. It was as if the Walsh family had simply evaporated. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints, but they weren't heading away from the car. They were heading toward it. 3 sets, 2 adults and 1 child, emerging from the sawgrass beyond the guardrail and ending at the vehicle. The prints were wet, dripping with that black Everglades muck, but they only went one way, out of the swamp to the car, and then nothing. I followed the tracks backward, climbing over the guardrail and into the tall grass. The ground immediately became soft, wet, treacherous. My flashlight beam penetrated maybe 10 feet into the wall of sawgrass before being swallowed by the darkness. The prints continued straight into the water, as if the family had simply walked out of the swamp and into their car, then vanished. But that was impossible. The water here was at least 6 feet deep, full of gators and snakes and God knows what else. No one could walk through that, especially not with a 6-year-old child. And the prints were fresh, maybe an hour old based on how the mud was still settling. But the trucker had reported the abandoned car only 10 minutes ago, and he'd said it had been there when he passed it heading westbound 20 minutes before that. The timeline didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. I was about to head back to my cruiser to call it in when I heard it. Singing. A child's voice, high and sweet, coming from deeper in the sawgrass. It was a Disney song, A Whole New World from Aladdin. The kind of song a 6-year-old girl who'd just been to Disney World might sing. "Emma?" I called out, wading deeper into the marsh. "Emma Walsh? This is the police. Your parents are looking for you." The singing continued, but it didn't get closer or further away. It stayed at the same distance no matter how far I walked, like it was matching my pace, staying just out of reach. The water was up to my knees now, and I could feel things brushing against my legs, fish, snakes, or worse. Every instinct told me to turn back, but that child's voice kept pulling me forward. Then the singing stopped, replaced by laughter. Not a child's laughter, but something older, wrong. It was like multiple voices laughing in unison, some high, some low, all slightly out of sync. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the water, and that's when I saw them. Eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting my flashlight beam, but they were too high to be alligators, too large to be birds. They were at human height, scattered throughout the sawgrass, all watching me. I drew my weapon, though what good a 9mm would do against whatever I was seeing I didn't know. "Florida Highway Patrol! Identify yourself." The eyes blinked in unison and then they were gone. Not like they'd moved away, but like someone had flipped a switch and turned them off. The marsh was suddenly silent. No insects, no birds, no splash of water. The kind of silence that only happens when every living thing is holding its breath, waiting for a predator to pass. I backed out of the water slowly, keeping my weapon drawn, my flashlight sweeping the sawgrass. It wasn't until I was back on solid ground, over the guardrail, that the normal sounds of the Everglades returned. I was soaked in sweat and swamp water, my hands shaking as I holstered my weapon. The Camry was still there, still running, still empty. But something had changed. The Disney souvenirs in the back seat were different. The mouse ears were old, faded, like they were from the 1970s. The stuffed Pluto was moth-eaten and moldy. The princess dress was rotted, hanging in tatters. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The souvenirs were new again, bright and cheerful. Price tags still attached. I was losing it. The heat, the humidity, the isolation of the alley. They were playing tricks on my mind. I called it in, requested backup in a tow truck. While I waited, I sat in my air-conditioned cruiser trying to make sense of what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen. The eyes in the swamp could have been birds. The singing could have been the wind in the grass. The changing souvenirs could have been a trick of the light. But I knew they weren't. Trooper Janet Williams arrived first, a 10-year veteran who'd worked Miami-Dade before transferring to Highway Patrol. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Marcus, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I said, not trusting myself to explain. "Family of 3, abandoned vehicle. No sign of them." She walked over to the Camry, looked inside, then turned back to me with a confused expression. "Marcus, what family?" "What do you mean?" "This is a single rental. One driver registered, no additional passengers. And look," she pointed to the back seat. There were no souvenirs, no suitcases, just a single backpack and a laptop bag. I walked over and looked for myself. She was right. The family's belongings were gone. Even the purse on the passenger seat had been replaced by a briefcase. I pulled out my phone to check the photos I'd taken earlier, but they showed exactly what Janet was seeing. A single person's belongings. No Disney souvenirs. No evidence a family had ever been in the car. "The rental agreement," I said, grabbing the paper from the dashboard. It now showed the car rented to David Vogel from New York, not Jennifer Walsh from Cleveland. How was that possible? I'd held the original agreement in my hands not 30 minutes ago. "You sure you're okay?" Janet asked, genuine concern in her voice. "This heat can mess with you. Maybe you should—" She was cut off by a sound from the swamp. Singing, a child's voice, clear and sweet. A whole new world. Janet's hand went to her weapon. "What the hell is that? You hear it too?" "Of course I hear it." "Sounds like a kid." We both turned toward the sawgrass, our flashlights converging on the same spot. There, just at the edge of our light's reach, stood a little girl. 6 years old, maybe 7, wearing a Disney princess dress. She was soaking wet, covered in mud, but she was smiling and waving at us. "Emma," I called out. The girl nodded, still smiling, still waving. But something was wrong with her movements. They were too fluid, like she was underwater, and her smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. "We need to get her," Janet said, moving toward the guardrail. I grabbed her arm. "No, something's not right." "Marcus, that's a child. Look at her shadow." Janet looked. The girl cast no shadow despite our flashlights hitting her directly. And now that we were really looking, we could see through her slightly, like she was made of fog or steam rising from the swamp. "Jesus Christ," Janet whispered. The girl opened her mouth, and the singing came out, but her lips didn't match the words. The song was coming from somewhere else, using her as a speaker. Then she turned and walked back into the sawgrass, disappearing into the darkness. But just before she vanished, I swear she looked back at me, and her eyes were ancient, older than the swamp, older than Florida itself. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us willing to admit what we'd just seen. Finally, Janet broke the silence. "We report this as an abandoned vehicle. Driver couldn't be located. Possible DUI, wandered into the swamp. Janet, we saw swamp gas, reflection of light on the water. Heat mirages." "That's what we saw, Marcus." She was right, of course. That's all we could report. Anything else would get us both psychological evaluations and desk duty. But we both knew what we'd really seen. The tow truck arrived and took the Camry. The official report listed David Vogel as missing, possibly intoxicated, presumed lost in the Everglades. But I knew David Vogel had never existed, or had always existed, or existed only sometimes when whatever controlled mile marker 51 needed him to. I went home after my shift, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Walsh family from Cleveland, who may or may not have existed, who may or may not have walked out of the swamp and into nowhere. I thought about Emma's singing, about those eyes watching from the sawgrass, about the ancient thing wearing a child's form. 2 days later, I was back on the alley for another night shift. As I passed mile marker 51, I slowed down, looking for any signs of what had happened. The shoulder was clean, no evidence a car had ever been there. But carved into the guardrail, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking, were 3 names: Jennifer, Michael, and Emma Walsh. And underneath a date, June 15th, 1987. 31 years ago. The same family had disappeared 31 years ago. I pulled over and got out, running my fingers over the carved names. They were weathered, old, like they'd been there for decades, but I'd driven past this spot hundreds of times and never seen them before. As I stood there, my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a voice. A little girl's voice. "We're still here, Trooper Rodriguez." We're all still here, waiting at mile marker 51, waiting for someone to find us, waiting for someone to join us. The radio went dead. When I tried to call dispatch, I got nothing but static. My cell phone had no signal. I was alone on the alley with whatever haunted mile marker 51. That's when I saw the headlights approaching from the east. A white Toyota Camry, moving slowly, hazard lights blinking. As it passed, I saw them inside, the Walsh family. Jennifer driving, Michael in the passenger seat, little Emma in the back with her Disney souvenirs. They were all soaking wet, covered in swamp mud, but they were smiling. Emma waved at me as they passed. That same too-wide smile, that same fluid underwater movement. Then the Camry vanished. Not drove away. Vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, leaving only the smell of swamp water and decay. I got back in my cruiser and drove. I didn't stop until I was in Fort Lauderdale, until I was away from the alley, away from mile marker 51. I requested a transfer that night, but they denied it. Said I was too valuable on that stretch, that I knew it better than anyone. So I kept working the alley, and every few weeks there would be another abandoned car at mile marker 51. Another missing person, another family that may or may not have existed. And sometimes, on very quiet nights when the mist rises from the swamp and the radio fills with static, I hear Emma Walsh singing Disney songs, inviting me to join them in whatever place they've gone to. The worst part? I've started to want to accept the invitation. 3 weeks after the Walsh incident, I started doing research on my own time. The Florida Highway Patrol database went back to 1969, when they first computerized records, but I needed to go deeper. I spent my days off at the Collier County Historical Society, digging through newspaper archives, old police reports, anything that mentioned mile marker 51 or that stretch of Alligator Alley. What I found made me wish I'd left it alone. The pattern went back to 1928, when the Tamiami Trail was first cut through the Everglades. Back then, it wasn't I-75 or Alligator Alley. It was just a rough road connecting Tampa to Miami, hence the name. The first recorded disappearance was a surveying crew, 5 men who were mapping out improvements to the road. They were found 3 days later, walking along the trail completely naked and speaking in unison. Not the same words at the same time. Literally the same voice coming from 5 mouths. They all died within hours of being found, their bodies desiccating like they'd been mummified, even though they'd been perfectly healthy when discovered. The spot where they were found? What would later become mile marker 51 when the interstate was built in the 1960s. I photocopied everything and started building a timeline. 1928, 1935, 1943, 1951, 1959. The disappearances happened every 7 to 8 years like clockwork. Then, when I-75 was constructed and the location became mile marker 51, the pattern accelerated. 1967, 1971, 1975, 1979, 1983, 1987. Every 4 years, then every 2, then by the 2000s it was happening multiple times per year. The location was feeding more frequently, growing stronger. Janet found me at my apartment one evening, surrounded by papers and laptop screens, looking like a conspiracy theorist who'd gone off the deep end. "Marcus, what the hell is this?" she asked, picking up a photo from 1962 showing a family standing next to their car at what would become mile marker 51. They looked exactly like the Walsh family. Exactly. "They're the same people," I said, knowing how insane it sounded. "Look." I showed her photos from 1943, 1971, 1987, 2003. Different names, different origins, but always the same family. Same faces, same ages, even the same Disney merchandise, decades before Disney World was built in Florida. That's impossible. Everything about mile marker 51 is impossible. But look at this. I pulled up a map I'd been working on, marking every disappearance location. They formed a perfect spiral with mile marker 51 at the center. It's not random. There's intelligence behind it, purpose. "Marcus, you need to stop this. You're going to drive yourself crazy." I talked to Ray Billy yesterday. Janet went quiet. Ray Billy was a Seminole elder who lived on the Big Cypress Reservation. His family had been in the Everglades since before Europeans arrived. If anyone knew the old stories, it was Ray. "What did he say?" she asked finally. "He said mile marker 51 is where they broke through." "They?" He wouldn't say. Just kept repeating a word in Miccosukee, Nawila. When I asked what it meant, he said it doesn't translate. It's not a word for something that exists in our world. It's a word for something that shouldn't exist anywhere. Janet sat down, her skepticism cracking. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the Everglades. Said there were places where the water remembered things that should be forgotten. Places where time got stuck, like a skip in a record. June 15th, I said. What? Every disappearance at mile marker 51 connected to the Walsh family happens on June 15th. Tomorrow is June 15th. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We had to be there. We had to try to stop it, or at least understand it. The next night, we positioned ourselves at mile marker 50, just close enough to see, but hopefully far enough to avoid whatever happened at 51. I'd brought equipment, cameras, EMF readers, a thermal imaging device I'd borrowed from a friend in search and rescue. Janet thought I was crazy, but she was there, which meant she believed enough to risk her career. At exactly 2:43 a.m., the same time I'd gotten the call 3 weeks earlier, a white Toyota Camry appeared in the eastbound lane, driving slowly. But it wasn't coming from the west. It materialized out of nowhere, like it had driven out of the air itself. "Are you recording this?" Janet whispered. "Everything," I confirmed, though when I looked at the camera screen, all I saw was static. The Camry pulled over at mile marker 51. The Walsh family got out. Jennifer, Michael, little Emma in her princess dress. But they moved wrong, like they were puppets being controlled by someone who didn't quite understand how human bodies worked. They stood by the guardrail, looking out at the swamp, waiting. Then the water began to glow. It started as a faint phosphorescence, like the bioluminescent algae you sometimes see in the ocean. But it grew brighter, more structured, forming patterns and symbols that hurt to look at. The air above the water shimmered, and through that shimmer I could see another place, another Florida, one where the roads were made of crushed bone and the buildings were grown rather than built, where things that might once have been human scuttled through streets flooded with black water. "Jesus Christ," Janet breathed. "What is that?" "I think it's their Florida," I said. "The Florida that exists parallel to ours, and mile marker 51 is where the two touch." The Walsh family walked toward the shimmering air. But as they got closer, more figures emerged from the swamp. Dozens of them, all the missing people from over the decades. They were all there, preserved exactly as they'd been when they vanished. But wrong. They moved in unison, breathed in unison, turned their heads to look at us in perfect synchronization. "We need to go," Janet said, grabbing my arm. "Now." But I couldn't move. Emma Walsh had turned to look directly at me, and her eyes were no longer a child's eyes. They were ancient, vast, filled with the knowledge of that other Florida. "Trooper Rodriguez," she said, but it wasn't her voice. It was the voice of the swamp itself, of the limestone beneath Florida, of the water that connected everything. "You've been searching for answers. Would you like to see the truth?" "Marcus, don't," Janet warned, but I was already walking toward them. As I got closer, I could see more details of that other world through the shimmer. The things living there had once been human, maybe, millions of years ago or millions of years in the future. They'd adapted to a Florida that had never drained its swamps, never built its cities, never tried to impose order on the chaos of the wetlands. They were part alligator, part human, part something else entirely, and they were beautiful in their wrongness. "This is the Florida that should have been," Emma, who wasn't Emma, said. "Before your kind changed it, paved it, drained it, tamed it. But it still exists, just a dimension away. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the moon and water and heat align, the barrier thins. People cross over. And sometimes, we cross over here." "The disappearances," I said, understanding, flooding through me. "You're not taking people. They're choosing to cross. Some choose, others are chosen. The distinction matters less than you think." She held out her hand. "Come see. Come understand. Your Florida is dying, Trooper Rodriguez. The heat rises, the waters rise, the storms grow stronger. Soon, this Florida will be underwater, uninhabitable. But our Florida thrives. Our Florida is eternal. I reached out, my hand inches from hers. In that moment, I could feel it, the pull of that other world. A place where I wouldn't have to worry about drunk drivers or drug runners or the endless stupidity of Florida man. A place where everything made a different kind of sense. Janet's gunshot shattered the moment. She hadn't aimed at Emma or any of the figures. She'd shot the ground at my feet, the sound breaking whatever spell I was under. I stumbled backward, and instantly the shimmer began to fade. The figures from the swamp looked sad, disappointed, but not angry. "You can't fight the tide forever," Emma said as she began to fade. "Florida belongs to the water, to the old things that swim in the deep places. One day, you'll all have to choose, drown in your world or swim in ours." They vanished, along with the Camry, leaving just Janet and me standing on the empty highway. The cameras showed nothing but static. The EMF readers had fried. The thermal imaging device was melted into a lump of plastic and metal. We had no proof of what we'd seen. "Thank you," I said to Janet. "You were really going to go with them." "Yeah, I think I was." We drove back to Fort Lauderdale in silence. The next day, I put in for a transfer again. This time, they approved it. They moved me to the turnpike, far from the Everglades, far from mile marker 51. Janet took over my patrol section of the alley. For a few months, I thought I was free. I worked the turnpike, wrote tickets, helped tourists, did normal trooper things. But Florida doesn't let you go that easily. The dream started in September, when the hurricanes came. I dreamed of that other Florida, the one I'd glimpsed through the shimmer. In my dreams, I swam through flooded cities where buildings were covered in scales and breathed like living things. I flew with things that had once been pelicans, but were now something more. Something that could navigate between dimensions. I spoke with the Nawila, the things that shouldn't exist, and they told me the history of all the Floridas that had been and could be. And every night, Emma Walsh stood at the foot of my bed, still 6 years old, still wearing her princess dress, still smiling that too-wide smile. "The water is coming, Trooper Rodriguez," she would say. "Your Florida has maybe 20 years before the seas reclaim it. Ours has forever. The choice is still available. The door at mile marker 51 is always open." I started researching climate change projections for Florida. The optimistic models gave us 50 years before major coastal flooding. The pessimistic ones gave us 15. Either way, Emma was right. Our Florida was temporary, a brief experiment in defying nature that would inevitably fail. In October, Janet called me. Her voice was different, distant. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" "I've been seeing them. Every night at mile marker 51. More of them each time. They're not taking people anymore, they're recruiting." "Recruiting for what?" "The migration. They say it's going to happen soon. When the next Category 5 hits, when the storm surge reaches the alley, the barrier between worlds will collapse completely. Everyone will have to choose, stay and drown, or cross over and change. Janet, you need to get away from there." "I can't. I tried to transfer, but they denied it. They say I'm too valuable on the alley, just like they told you." She paused. "I think they know, Marcus. I think the higher-ups know about mile marker 51, about what's coming, and they're keeping certain people in place. People who've been marked." "Marked?" "You looked through the shimmer." I shot a gun in the presence of the Nawila. "We're both marked now. We're going to be given a choice when the time comes. Not just to cross over, but to help others cross, to be guides between worlds. That's insane, is it? Look at Florida's history, Marcus. Built on swampland, fighting nature every step of the way. Maybe it was always meant to fail. Maybe we were always meant to return to the water, one way or another. She hung up before I could respond. I tried calling her back, but her number was disconnected. When I checked with dispatch, they said Janet Williams had never worked for the Florida Highway Patrol. There was no record of her ever existing. But I knew better. Janet was real. She'd just chosen which Florida she wanted to exist in. I went back to mile marker 51 one last time, in November, during the day when I thought it would be safer. The guardrail still had the Walsh family names carved into it, but now there were more names. Hundreds of them, carved so small you needed a magnifying glass to read them. Every person who'd disappeared over the decades. And at the bottom, freshly carved, was Janet Williams. As I traced her name with my finger, I heard a whisper in my ear. Not Emma this time, but Janet herself. It's not bad here, Marcus. It's different, but not bad. We swim instead of walk. We breathe water as easily as air. We're part of something larger, older, truer than the lie of dry land. When you're ready, we'll be waiting. I left Florida that day, turned in my badge, packed my things, and drove north until I hit Georgia, then kept going. I live in Tennessee now, about as far from the ocean as I can get. But distance doesn't matter when you've been marked. Every night, in my dreams, I'm back on Alligator Alley. Every night, the water rises a little higher, and every night, Emma Walsh and Janet Williams and all the others stand at mile marker 51 waiting for me to come home. Because that's what Florida does. It gets into your blood like humidity, into your dreams like the sound of waves. You can leave Florida, but Florida never leaves you. And somewhere, in a dimension just a shimmer away, there's another Florida where the water won and humanity adapted. Where mile marker 51 is a gateway, not a trap. Where the Nawila swim through cities of coral and bone, singing songs that sound like children's voices. The hurricane is coming. The big one, the one that will finally break the barrier completely. When it does, everyone in Florida will have to make the choice. Stay and drown. Or cross over and change. I know which one I'm choosing. I've always known. I thought I could escape it by moving to Tennessee. For 3 years, I almost believed I had. I got a job as a small-town cop in a place where the biggest concern was teenagers drinking in the Walmart parking lot. I stopped dreaming about the other Florida. Emma Walsh's visits gradually faded. I even started dating someone, a teacher named Emily, who'd never been south of Atlanta and had no interest in changing that. Then, Hurricane Michael happened in October 2018, and everything went to hell. I was watching the Weather Channel when they started talking about the storm, Category 5, the first to hit the continental U.S. since Andrew in '92. But it wasn't the wind speeds or the storm surge projections that caught my attention. It was the trajectory. The eye was going to pass directly over Collier County, directly over mile marker 51. My phone rang. Unknown number, but somehow I knew who it would be. "Hello, Marcus." It was Ray Billy, the Seminole elder. His voice sounded older, more tired than when I'd met him 3 years ago. "You feel it, don't you?" "The pulling." "I'm in Tennessee, Ray. I'm nowhere near. Distance doesn't matter when the worlds are about to touch. You've been marked. When the eye passes over the gateway, you'll be called. We all will. I'm not coming back." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My grandfather told me stories about the last time this happened. 1926, the Great Miami Hurricane. The eye passed over the sacred places, and the barrier fell for 3 days. Those who were marked had no choice. They were pulled back, no matter how far they'd run. Some woke up in Florida with no memory of traveling. Others simply appeared, teleported across space because the storm doesn't follow the rules of your physics. That's impossible. So is mile marker 51, so are the Walsh family. So is the other Florida you've seen, but they all exist, don't they? The line went dead. I tried to call Emily, to tell her I was going to be unavailable for a few days, but my phone wouldn't work. The screen showed impossible things. GPS coordinates that placed me in the middle of the Everglades, text messages in languages that hurt to read, photos I'd never taken of places that shouldn't exist. I went to bed that night in Tennessee. I woke up parked at mile marker 50 on Alligator Alley, sitting in a Florida Highway Patrol cruiser I hadn't driven in 3 years, wearing a uniform that should have been in a landfill. The hurricane was 12 hours from landfall. The alley was abandoned, evacuated. Everyone with sense had fled north or sheltered on the coasts. But as I sat there, other vehicles began appearing. Not driving up, just appearing, like I had. State troopers, local cops, park rangers, EMTs, all the marked ones Ray had talked about. We'd all been pulled back to witness what was coming. Janet was there, but she wasn't the Janet I remembered. She was changed, adapted. Her skin had a scaled texture that caught the light wrong, and her eyes had a nictitating membrane that flicked across them when she blinked. She could still speak, but her voice had harmonics in it, like multiple people talking at slightly different frequencies. "Marcus," she said, and I heard genuine joy in that strange voice. "You came back." I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. The storm just makes choosing easier. More people arrived as the morning progressed. Some I recognized from my research, descendants of those who'd disappeared over the decades. Others were strangers, but they all had the same haunted look, the same sense of being pulled by invisible strings. By noon, there were maybe 50 of us, all standing around mile marker 51, waiting. The wind was picking up, hot and wet and wrong. The sky had turned a sick green color, and the pressure was dropping so fast our ears kept popping. In the distance, we could see the wall of the hurricane approaching, a solid mass of clouds and rain and destruction. Then they started emerging from the swamp. Not just the Walsh family this time, but all of them. Everyone who'd ever disappeared at mile marker 51, walking out of the sawgrass in a long procession. They were all changed like Janet, adapted for the other Florida. Some had gills pulsing on their necks. Others had webbed fingers and toes. A few had gone further, barely human anymore, more like walking catfish or bipedal alligators. Emma Walsh was at the front of the procession. She'd grown since I'd last seen her. Not older, but larger, more complex. She had multiple sets of eyes now, positioned to see in all directions at once. Her princess dress had become part of her. The fabric fused with her skin in patterns that looked almost decorative until you saw them move. "Welcome home, Trooper Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying despite the growing wind. "The storm brings change. Change brings choice. Choice brings evolution. What do you want from us?" someone called out. A park ranger, young, terrified. "Nothing you won't freely give," Emma replied. "The storm will destroy much of your Florida. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Keys, they'll be underwater. Hundreds of thousands will die. Millions will be displaced. Your world will blame climate change, stronger hurricanes, rising seas. All true, but not the whole truth." She gestured to the swamp behind her, and the water began to glow again, that phosphorescent shine that preceded the opening of the gateway. "The truth is that your Florida was always temporary. A century of trying to impose order on chaos, of draining swamps and building on sand. But nature remembers what was. The water remembers. And when your world fails, ours remains. The wind was howling now, strong enough that we had to brace against our vehicles. The rain started, horizontal sheets that stung like needles. But around mile marker 51, there was a bubble of calm, like we were in the eye of our own personal storm. The choice is simple, Emma continued. Stay in your dying Florida and try to rebuild, knowing that the next storm will be worse, and the one after that worse still. Or cross over to our Florida, where humanity has adapted, evolved, survived. But we won't be human anymore, I said. Were you ever truly human? She asked. Or were you always just animals pretending to be something more? In our Florida, we've accepted what we are. Predators, prey. Part of the ecosystem, not separate from it. The gateway was fully open now. Through it, I could see the other Florida clearly for the first time. It wasn't the nightmare I'd expected. Cities rose from the water, but they were grown, not built. Massive coral structures that breathed and lived. The inhabitants moved through flooded streets as easily as they did through air, their bodies perfectly adapted to both. There was beauty in it, a harmony between human and nature that our Florida had never achieved. Look at your world, Emma said, and suddenly we could see through the storm to the coast. Naples was already flooding, storm surge overwhelming the seawalls. Fort Myers was being torn apart by the wind. Now, look at ours. In the other Florida, the storm existed, but it wasn't destructive. The inhabitants rode it like surfers, using the energy to power their organic cities. The wind and rain were integrated, part of the system, not fighting against it. Janet, I called out, is it really better there? She walked over to me, moving with that fluid grace that wasn't quite human anymore. Different, Marcus. Not better or worse, just different. I breathe water now. I see colors that don't exist in your spectrum. I'm part of something larger. Not a hive mind, but a connected consciousness. I'm still me, but I'm also more. And if we don't choose, if we stay, Emma's multiple eyes all focused on me, then you rebuild, again and again, each time losing more ground to the water. Florida will become uninhabitable within 50 years. Less if the ice sheets collapse faster than predicted. You can fight the tide, or you can flow with it. A man stepped forward, a sheriff from Broward County. My family, my kids, what happens to them if I cross? They'll be given the same choice when their time comes. The marked ones go first to prepare the way. Others follow as they're ready. And if they choose not to follow? Emma's expression, alien as it was, showed something like sadness. Then you'll drift apart, as species do when they diverge. But isn't that already happening? How many of you still relate to unmarked humans the same way? How many of you dream of normal things? You're already changing, already evolving. We're just offering you a direction. The storm was directly overhead now. The eye wall was approaching mile marker 51, and when it arrived, the gateway would be at its widest. The choice would have to be made. I watched as some of the marked ones walked toward the gateway. The young park ranger was first, trembling but determined. He stepped through and immediately began changing, his body adapting to the new environment. Scales formed, gills opened. His eyes shifted to better see underwater. But he was still himself, still aware, still choosing each change. Others held back, terrified. A few tried to run, to get in their vehicles and flee. But their cars wouldn't start. The storm wouldn't let them leave, not yet. Not until they'd made a choice. I need to see more, I said. I need to understand what I'm choosing." Emma smiled with too many mouths. "Then come, Trooper Rodriguez. Take my hand and see." I walked to her, each step feeling like a lifetime. When our hands touched, I was immediately transported. Not physically, but mentally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it. I experienced the other Florida not as an observer, but as an inhabitant. I felt the water flowing through my gills, tasted the salt and life in it. I swam through the coral cities, understanding their growth patterns, their symbiosis with human consciousness. I hunted in the deep places where leviathans that had never gone extinct still swam. I communicated through biochemical signals, through bioluminescence, through harmonics that traveled for miles underwater. And I felt the connection to everything. Every drop of water was connected to every other drop. Every creature was part of the greater ecosystem. There was no separation between self and environment. It was terrifying and beautiful and completely alien to everything I'd known as human. "This is what you're offering," I said when the vision ended. "This is one possibility," Emma corrected. "Each person who crosses adds to what we become. You would bring your own uniqueness, your own evolution. We're not a static endpoint, Trooper Rodriguez. We're a different path forward." The eye wall hit mile marker 51. The world exploded into chaos. Wind that could shred steel. Rain that fell sideways, upwards, in spirals that defied physics. Lightning that stayed in the air, forming persistent plasma structures that looked almost alive. And through it all, the gateway pulled at us, offering calm, offering escape, offering evolution. Janet took my hand. "Whatever you choose, Marcus, I want you to know. I don't regret crossing over. I miss things, yes. Pizza, sunsets that aren't underwater, my mother's voice. But I've gained so much more. I've seen the deepest trenches of the ocean. I've communicated with dolphins, with whales, with things that have no names in your language. I've been part of the reef's consciousness, felt what it feels as it grows. It's not human, but it's still life, still existence, still meaning." The gateway pulsed, and I understood that this was the moment. The hurricane would pass, the gateway would close, and the chance would be gone for who knew how long. Maybe forever if our Florida collapsed before the next alignment. Some of the marked ones were crossing. Others were refusing, holding on to their humanity even as the storm tried to tear them apart. And a few, like me, stood at the threshold, undecided. That's when I saw them. Not the changed humans from the other Florida, but the Nawila themselves. The things that had created the gateway that had guided evolution in both Floridas. They were vast, incomprehensible, existing in more dimensions than I could perceive. But they were also familiar. They were the mangroves and the manatees, the hurricanes, and the limestone aquifers. They were Florida itself, given consciousness and choice. "You are all my children," one of them said without words, communicating directly to our minds. "Whether you stay or go, evolve or remain, you are all part of what I am. The division between worlds is artificial, temporary. Eventually, all water returns to the sea. All life returns to the source. Choose your path, but know that all paths lead to the same ocean." The vision faded, and I was back at mile marker 51, storm raging, gateway pulsing, choice demanding to be made. I stood at the threshold for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Time moves differently in hurricanes and even more differently at mile marker 51. The gateway pulsed with each lightning strike, showing glimpses of the other Florida. Cities of living coral, highways of flowing water, humans that weren't quite human anymore swimming through flooded streets like they were born to it. "Marcus!" someone shouted over the wind. It was Captain Harrison from my old precinct, a man I'd worked with for 15 years. He was standing firm against the storm, refusing to approach the gateway. "Don't do it! Whatever that thing is, it's not salvation. It's surrender." But even as he spoke, I could see the fear in his eyes. Not fear of the gateway, but fear of the storm, of the flooding, of the future our Florida faced. He was holding on to the cruiser like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and maybe for him, it was. Emma Walsh, or the thing that had once been Emma Walsh, walked through the storm like it was a gentle breeze. The wind parted around her. The rain never touched her scaled skin. She moved between the marked ones, not pushing, not pulling, just existing as proof of what was possible. "The eye is passing," she announced. "You have minutes, not hours. Choose." I watched as more people made their decisions. A young EMT from Broward walked through the gateway, her body immediately beginning to adapt. An older detective from Miami-Dade fell to his knees, refusing, praying to a God who didn't seem to be listening. Janet stood with the changed ones, not pressuring me but clearly hoping I'd join them. Then I saw something that made my decision. Through the gateway, in that other Florida, I saw a Florida Highway Patrol unit. But it wasn't like ours. It was organic, grown from some kind of calcified coral, moving through the water on currents rather than wheels. And driving it, if you could call it driving, was another version of me. A Marcus Rodriguez who had made the choice years ago, who had adapted, evolved, but was still recognizably doing the job, still protecting and serving, just in a different way. "That's you," Emma said, appearing beside me. "Or rather, that's who you could be. In that Florida, you still help people. You guide them through the flooded highways, protect them from the things that hunt in the deep. You're still Trooper Rodriguez, just more. And if I stay," she showed me that too, not through the gateway, but through a vision, a projection of probability. I saw myself in 10 years, 20, still fighting the rising waters. I saw Miami underwater, the Everglades reclaiming everything south of Lake Okeechobee. I saw millions of climate refugees fleeing north. Saw wars fought over dry land. Saw Florida becoming a memory, a cautionary tale about humanity's hubris. That's just one possibility, I argued. True. But which do you think is more likely? That humanity suddenly learns to live in harmony with nature, or that you continue the same patterns that led you here? A man I didn't recognize stepped up to the gateway, then hesitated. "My daughter," he said. "She's only 3. If I change, will I even recognize her anymore? Will she recognize me?" Emma's multiple eyes showed something like compassion. Love transcends form. The connection between parent and child exists in both Floridas. She will know you, and you will know her, no matter what shape you take. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. Each person's transformation is unique. You might change so little that she barely notices. You might change so much that she needs time to adjust. But the love remains. That's one thing both Floridas share. The man closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and walked through. His transformation was gentler than some, more subtle. Scales, yes, but keeping his basic human shape. He looked back at us from the other side and nodded, as if to say it was okay. It was bearable. It was still him. The wind shifted, and suddenly I could hear something over the storm. Sirens. Not from our world, but from theirs. The Florida Highway Patrol of the other world was responding to something, protecting someone, doing the job in their adapted way. 2 minutes, Emma announced. The eye wall is almost here. I thought about Emily back in Tennessee, probably wondering where I was. I thought about my life there, safe and dry and utterly disconnected from everything I'd been. I thought about the oath I'd taken as a trooper, to protect and serve. But protect and serve who? A Florida that was drowning, or a Florida that had learned to swim? Captain Harrison made a break for his cruiser, trying to drive away. The storm caught him immediately, flipping the vehicle like a toy. Through the rain, I saw him crawling from the wreckage, bloody but alive, still refusing to accept what was happening. "This is wrong," he screamed. "This is giving up. We're human beings. We don't surrender to nature. We conquer it." "And how's that working out?" Janet asked, her voice carrying despite the wind. "We've been conquering nature for centuries. Where has it led us? To this, to choosing between drowning and evolving. There are other choices. Name one that doesn't end with Florida underwater." He couldn't. The gateway began to pulse faster, brighter. The barrier between worlds was at its thinnest. Through it, I could see not just the other Florida, but other Floridas, plural. Worlds where different choices had been made, where evolution had taken different paths. In one, humanity had become fully aquatic, more fish than mammal. In another, they'd merged with the mangroves, becoming plant-animal hybrids that filtered water through their bodies. In yet another, they'd gone deeper, becoming something like living limestone, part of the very bones of Florida itself. "All paths lead to the same ocean," the Nawila had said, "but they lead there differently." 30 seconds, Emma called. I made my choice, but it wasn't the choice anyone expected, including me. I walked to the gateway, put my hand on its edge where the two worlds met, and I held it open. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, genuinely surprised. "My job," I said. "Protecting and serving. Some people need to cross, others need to stay. But they need time to decide, really decide, not be forced by the storm." The gateway responded to my touch, stabilizing, widening. The storm couldn't close it as long as I held it, but I could feel the cost immediately. Holding the boundary between worlds was like holding live electricity, like being in two places at once, existing and not existing simultaneously. "You can't maintain this," Emma warned. "The strain will kill you. Or worse, scatter you across all possible Floridas. Then I guess you'd better convince people quickly." What happened next was chaos, but purposeful chaos. The marked ones who'd been hesitating now had time to really consider. Some chose to cross, walking through with determination rather than desperation. Others chose to stay, but it was a real choice now, not just paralysis. Janet came to me, put her transformed hand on mine where I held the gateway. "Let me help. You can't. You're already on the other side. I'm on both sides, Marcus. Just like you are now." She gripped the gateway with me, and I felt the strain lessen. She was right. She existed in both Floridas simultaneously, a bridge between worlds. Together, we held it open as the eye wall passed directly overhead. The storm raged, reality twisted, but the gateway remained stable. More people crossed. Others didn't. Captain Harrison, bloody and broken, crawled to his feet and walked away, choosing his drowning Florida over our swimming one. The young park ranger who'd crossed early came back partially, existing at the boundary like Janet, helping others decide. Then, something unexpected happened. Unmarked people began arriving. Regular citizens who'd somehow been drawn to mile marker 51 during the storm. They couldn't see the gateway clearly, but they could feel it. Some of them chose to cross blind, trusting in something beyond their understanding. Others fled, terrified by what they couldn't quite perceive, A mother with 2 children appeared, their car having broken down nearby. She couldn't see the gateway, but her children could. Children always could, Emma explained. Their minds weren't fixed yet, weren't locked into one version of reality. "Mommy, the fish people want us to come swimming," the younger child said. "There are no fish people, honey," the mother replied, but her voice was uncertain. "They're right there. The pretty lady with all the eyes is waving." Emma knelt down to the children's level, her multiple eyes focusing on them with gentle attention. "Hello, little ones. Would you like to learn to breathe underwater?" The children were delighted. The mother was terrified. But as she watched Emma interact with her kids, something shifted in her perception. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was mile marker 51's influence. Or maybe it was just a mother's intuition. But she began to see. Not clearly, but enough. "If we go," she asked, "will we still be a family?" "You'll be whatever you choose to be," Emma replied. "Family is about connection, not form." The mother looked at her children, at the storm destroying everything around them, at the gateway she could barely perceive. "Will it hurt?" Change always hurts a little, but so does staying the same when the world is transforming around you. The family chose to cross. Their transformation was beautiful. They became something like a pod of dolphins, separate but connected, playing in the flooded streets of the other Florida with joy I hadn't seen in our world for years. The storm began to weaken. The eye had passed, and the back wall was less intense. The gateway started to naturally close, the barrier between worlds reasserting itself. But I kept holding it, giving every last person a chance to choose. "Marcus, you have to let go," Janet warned. "If you're still holding it when it closes." I know. I'd be torn between worlds, existing in neither, probably scattered across every possible version of Florida. But there were still people choosing, still lives being decided. I couldn't let go yet. Then Emily appeared. Not physically, she was still in Tennessee, but somehow, through the connection the storm had created, she was there in my mind, in my heart. "Marcus, where are you? I woke up and you were gone, and there's this feeling like you're everywhere and nowhere at once." "I'm at mile marker 51, Emily. I'm holding open a door between worlds." "That's insane." "Yes, but it's also true. Through our connection, she saw what I saw. Both Floridas, all Floridas, the choice being made. She saw Janet, transformed but still herself. She saw the Walsh family, eternal in their adapted forms. She saw the future of both worlds, the drowning and the swimming. "Come back to me," she said. "I can't. Not the way I was." "Then I'll come to you." "Emily, no. You're not marked. You don't have to make this choice. Don't I?" "If you're choosing between worlds, doesn't that affect me?" "We're connected, Marcus. Maybe not by storm or supernatural gateway, but by something just as strong. So if you're making a choice, I deserve to make one too." The gateway pulsed, preparing for its final closure. Most people had chosen by now. The storm was moving inland, leaving destruction in its wake. In our Florida, the death toll would be in the hundreds. In the other Florida, they were celebrating the storm's passage, riding its energy into the future. "Choose, Marcus," Emma said, not unkindly. "The door is closing. Choose which Florida you'll serve." I looked at Janet holding the gateway with me, existing in both worlds. I looked at the marked ones who'd stayed, who'd chosen humanity even knowing what it would cost. I looked at those who'd crossed, already adapting, already becoming something new, and I chose both. Like Janet, I didn't fully cross, but I didn't fully stay either. I became a bridge, a permanent connection between the Floridas. Part of me would always be Trooper Rodriguez, working the highways of a drowning state. But part of me would also be swimming through the flooded streets of the other Florida, helping guide those who chose to cross. The gateway closed, but not completely. Where I stood, where Janet stood, where a few others chose to stand, it remained thin. Mile marker 51 would never fully separate the worlds again. There would always be a shimmer there, a place where people could choose, where evolution was an option rather than an inevitability. The storm passed. The marked ones who'd stayed dispersed, returning to their lives but forever changed by what they'd witnessed. The news reported Hurricane Michael as a Category 5 disaster. Billions in damage, hundreds dead. They didn't report the hundreds who'd simply vanished, who'd chosen another path. I exist now in both Floridas. By day, I'm Trooper Rodriguez, working the alley, helping evacuate the increasingly frequent floods, writing tickets to tourists who still come to a drowning paradise. By night, in dreams, during the moments between heartbeats, I'm in the other Florida, swimming through coral cities, breathing water, helping new arrivals adapt to their chosen evolution. Janet and I patrol mile marker 51 together, in both worlds simultaneously. We help those who are ready to see the gateway, to understand the choice. Some cross. Most don't. But the option is there, growing stronger as our Florida weakens and theirs thrives. The Walsh family still appears on June 15th each year, but now they're not trying to lure people. They're celebrating the anniversary of their transformation, of their escape from linear time into something larger. Emma has become something like a goddess of the gateway, a guardian of the choice. She helps children especially, whose minds are flexible enough to adapt easily. Captain Harrison died in 2020, drowned in his home during a flood he refused to evacuate from. He never accepted what he'd seen, never acknowledged the choice he'd made. But even in death, I sometimes see him in the other Florida, a ghostly presence refusing to adapt, refusing to evolve, but unable to fully leave. Emily moved to Florida in 2019. She said Tennessee was too far from the water, too far from me. She's not marked, but she's aware. She sees the shimmer at mile marker 51. She knows that someday, probably soon, she'll have to make the choice too. But she faces it without fear, with the kind of acceptance that comes from truly understanding what's at stake. Ray Billy, the Seminole elder, told me recently that the Nawila are pleased. The gateway is serving its purpose, not to force evolution, but to offer it. To give humanity the same choice nature has always offered: adapt or die. But with consciousness, with awareness, with the ability to choose your adaptation rather than have it chosen for you. The water is rising. Every year, more of Florida disappears beneath the waves. The hurricanes are getting stronger, more frequent. The choice is becoming less abstract, more immediate. Within a decade, maybe two, everyone in Florida will have to decide. But that's the future. Right now, tonight, I'm sitting at mile marker 51, watching the sunset paint the Everglades gold and red. In one world, I see the sawgrass and water as they've been for millennia. In another, I see the coral cities and the adapted humans swimming through streets that used to be dry land. Both are beautiful. Both are terrible. Both are Florida. A car is approaching, slowing down. The driver feels the pull but doesn't understand it. They'll stop, confused, maybe a little scared. And I'll be here to explain, to show them the shimmer, to offer them the choice. Because that's my job now. Not just protecting and serving one Florida, but protecting the right to choose between all possible Floridas. To swim or to drown. To evolve or to remain. To embrace the water or to fight it until the very end. The car stops. A family gets out. Parents and 2 children. The kids see the gateway immediately, their faces lighting up with wonder. The parents see only the swamp, but they feel something, know something is different about this place. "Officer," the father says, "is everything all right here?" It feels strange. "Everything's fine," I tell him. "Just Florida being Florida, though if you have a minute, there's something you might want to see, something about the future of this state. Your children can already see it. The question is, do you want to?" They always say yes. Curiosity is human nature, whether you breathe air or water. I lead them to the exact spot where the worlds touch, where the shimmer is strongest. Janet appears, partly in our world, partly in theirs. The perfect example of what's possible. "Don't be afraid," I tell them as their eyes widen, as they begin to truly see. "You're just seeing Florida as it really is. All of it, all the possibilities, all the choices." The mother gasps as she sees the coral cities. The father steps back as he watches the adapted humans swimming through flooded streets. The children laugh and wave at Emma Walsh, who waves back with too many arms from too many angles. "What is this?" the mother asks. "This is mile marker 51, I say. This is where Florida decides its future. One family, one person, one choice at a time. And we have to choose? Not today, maybe not for years, but eventually, yes. Everyone in Florida will have to choose. The water is coming. The only question is whether we'll learn to swim or insist on drowning." They leave, shaken but informed. They'll dream about what they've seen. They'll talk about it or try not to. Some will think they're crazy. Others will come looking for mile marker 51, drawn by stories of the gateway. And I'll be here, with Janet, with Emma, with all the others who exist between worlds. We'll be here when the next hurricane comes, when the next gateway opens wide, when the next wave of people have to choose. Because the water is patient, but it's not infinite. The time for choosing is coming faster than anyone wants to admit. And when it arrives, when all of Florida has to decide between drowning and evolving, we'll be here at mile marker 51, holding the door open, making sure everyone gets the choice. Even if they choose wrong. Even if they choose to drown. That's what makes us human. Quietest.